Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Geometry. I'm George Leoniak and excited to be here sharing a video with you. Today is going to be something a little bit different. Not a lot of new material in this presentation. I realized I had 63 videos out and I've been following a certain theme that I wanted to kind of address around the golden circle templates, the flower of life. I often call it the new flower of life or enhanced seed of life, things like that. But I thought it was a good time to kind of just review what I've been up to, where we're at in that progression, and kind of show you a series of videos that are kind of strung together. I created a separate playlist on this with about 17, including this one, 18 videos in it, that kind of walk through the progression of this golden circle template that has really revolutionized sacred geometry in my view. And so let's just jump into the video and I'll walk through that progression with you. So we're going to go back probably to have the dates here, July of 2021. And, up to this point in my sacred geometry career, I guess, or sacred geometry exploration, Metatron's Cube, the flower of life, the fruit of life, tree of life, as it's described in many textbooks all over, that was kind of like the foundation. And you know what, that was very much thinking that it contained all the Icosahedron, dodecahedron, tetrahedron, all the platonic solids were in there. But once I got a little bit more involved with the mathematics of understanding what was going on with the geometry, I discovered that the icosahedron within that is not an accurate icosahedron. Actually the edges here, rather than it being just an equilateral triangle like you see here, should be flared out like this, meaning that this triangle in the middle would be a 1-inch edge length to hold up the 1.618 measurements that are in here. So basically what this pattern is in this Metatrons Cube design is really an octahedron with a triangle in the middle of it. So it is missing a lot of the icosahedronness that I discovered. The other one that was really a surprise to me too, because certain authors really made a big deal around discovering the dodecahedron in Metatron's Cube. And I've had viewers describe, well, maybe it has to do with perspective, things like that. But then it would really throw off all the other forms in sacred geometry. So really this icosahedron and dodecahedron as they are in Metatron's Cube, I discovered, were really kind of dead ends in terms of expansive geometry that will continue on, that I'll be showing you in this video of what kind of blossomed for me around this. But this was the discovery. So I'm reviewing that video just to kind of set the stage. I discovered that, if you had a 1-inch edge length, like a regular pentagon, a pentagram in the middle of this 1 inch, well, this back edge here would be 0.618 to 1 inch. And when you do those measurements, these kind of orthographic projections that you see on Wikipedia, well, that measurement will maintain true to the pentagon dimensions of 1 to 0.618. And this is, very much off within this kind of squished back edge here, which means if you were to use this Metatron's Cube as a template to the building blocks of creation to pull those forms out, you would actually not be having correct measurements to actually build the forms. I don't even know what this form would look like with those measurements, or even if it's constructible based on what is there. So here's the next video that came along in the sequence. It was actually, 2 months later, something like that. And it took a while for me to discover how to draw the platonic solids nested within one another with the hexagon view, this threefold symmetry of the seed of life drawing. And in fact, I discovered that you didn't really need to do the whole flower of life or seed of fruit of life and all the extra circles. All you really needed was 6 circles around one. So that's the classic seed of life. And this red circle in the middle which is a phi ratio circle. So that's a golden ratio circle, which in many of these videos, if you visit, I'll show you the techniques. There's a few that I was working on of how to create that phi ratio circle. And once you do that, it provides all the data that you need to draw all the nested platonic solids. And this is really the first time that I was able to do that. This one is, it didn't get too expansive in this video. This is the first one because in the previous video, I pretty much said that there was 2 upgrades that I was introducing, but they weren't from this hexagonal view. It wasn't until much later that I finally simplified this. And the reason I was calling it simplification is because I discovered that all 3 views, the square or pentagonal view and the hexagon view, could be created just within the vesica Piscis and the seat of life. So everything was contained right there in the central circle. So, I thought that was pretty much maybe it, maybe the end of the journey. But then, the culminating thing, oh, great, I got all the nested platonic solids. I got the rhombic tricontohedron we're going to talk more about. But that was really kind of the start in the progression of where I was going next. And the September 28th, this is my birthday. This is my birthday video of the golden hexagon. I started to work with those golden ratio circles and just expand them into the regular flower of life pattern or into the seed of life type of patterns, and just play around, and came up with some very neat star patterns of stars related to the golden ratio stars, creating a kind of braided effect between the stars. But I was really interested in this golden hexagon shape that had these truncated edges that was one of these 3 new phi-based forms, I call them. I discovered that a few of them are not new at further research, but I created this little tetrahedron here that I could pull apart, which I never showed in any of the videos, and actually come up with this build, because it's built out of octahedrons and tetrahedrons to make that golden hexagon in the middle there, which I wanted to basically transpose this drawing from 2D to 3D and back and forth. That's how I like to work with these forms. And this was how I started to expand the my journey with sacred geometry, rather than it just being all contained in the seed of life, a little bit further outwards into using those circles in the rest of the seed of life. So, that discovery, after that, I got into Frank Chester's work, and for some reason I had a notion, so maybe I should revisit that, because I know his form is completely generated around the phi ratio of the kite faces that create the Chestahedron. So here's a Chestahedron. These kite faces are the star points of a 5-pointed star. There's just 3 of them. And, I discovered with my drawing that this is basically contained within the, this is actually a conglomeration of a few Chestahedrons that I put together into one pattern like this. That's in a subsequent video. But I thought that this pattern here with these flared out edges, I didn't think it actually was, that little flared out edge, if this is an individual Chestahedron here, that's what happens. That equilateral triangle, which would be straight, is actually in phi proportion to the outer edges of it. So this pattern right here, with the discoveries of the Chestahedron, kind of became my anchor point right here. This seed of life with 14 circles that are all in golden proportion to one another, the blue and the red circles, that was really discovered through my time with studying, I think there's 7 videos, a whole other playlist for the Chestahedron. And, the Deca Trio, which is the dual form of Frank's Chestahedron, discovering that really became kind of a key to what I started to call the KNEW, new flower of life. And it's really interesting to me, that Deca Trio video, how it's kind of been circulated around. And I really hope that the sacred geometry that I'm presenting kind of goes in this direction It's interesting that even just as of this morning, over at New Geometers, my Facebook page and Facebook group, please check that out and join. We're having really neat, interesting, material presented by different people there. This morning, this was on the first thing I saw on that page this morning was actually someone took this pattern that I did in that Deca Trio video and actually incorporated it into this another person's work out there. I forget whose this, maybe Clay Clay Thompson or something like that. Maybe some, I can't remember what his name is, but he's got a page with all sorts of designs and drawings and things relating it to magnetics and things like that. But there was my drawing underneath this bent triangle folded back diagram. And if people are utilizing material, please just cite where it comes from, because they might find a lot more information here at the New Geometry YouTube channel or other places that I'm sharing the work, because it's really connected to a whole structured connection points between all the facets of sacred geometry that I'm exploring, that someone might like to learn a lot more about those things too. So just, sharing where the information comes from, as I always do in my videos, really helps people follow the trail, just like I've been doing. But around this time, I discovered, that the dodecahedron that was right from the beginning, the kind of one that was really tough to kind of figure out how to draw in the original Metatrons Cube. I discovered that in this process of doing the flower of life with these phi ratio circles, that there was actually 3 nested dodecahedrons that just automatically presented themselves within that pattern. And I was like, this is really exciting, because this form that was really tough to do is already, and we're going to visit this kind of implosion model later on, starting to point me into a direction of how the dodecahedron is expanding or contracting based on those phi ratio circles. So this was back in November or October when I first created this pattern of the 3 nested, 4 nested, 5 nested phi ratio circles. Then I really became interested in, I guess, quasicrystals, and the Penrose tilings were kind of a follow-up with Frank's work and the Chestahedron, because the Chestahedron, I actually, when I put 2 together, I discovered that they made the Penrose tile one of the kite faces for that, or the diamond rhombus shape of a Penrose tiling. So then I was like, well, I got to look into that a bit more. And that led me into more around the quasicrystal structures. Basically what I started to see at this point was that the flower of life as it is pretty much just allowed us, because the dodecahedron and the icosahedron, they just weren't working in that, but the cube octahedron, the octahedron, cube, tetrahedron, that's pretty much what that pattern was presenting to me, were those 3 forms, or the truncations of those forms, or compounds of the forms in some cases. That's what it was allowing, because it didn't have the phi ratio involved in this. Yes, you can connect lines to make phi ratio in here, just like I did with these phi circles, but it's not inherent in the pattern, and it wasn't producing those forms. And if it did in those incorrect versions, there was no way for those forms to kind of be interrelated with one another. So the quasicrystals, and of course, the crystalline structure is very much, on Earth here. All the crystals are made of this type of cubic structure, cubic, rhombic dodecahedrons, octahedrons, prism shapes, very ordered symmetry that's all perfect with the flower of life, until quasicrystals showed up only in the 1970s, that all of a sudden there was this icosahedral symmetry that was showing up in these forms. And that included the phi ratio and the pentagonal structure and rhombic dodecahedron. Other things were in those patterns, which then existed in nature because it was found in a meteorite, so it was extraterrestrial origin, as well as high intensity heat like nuclear explosions would create quasicrystal structures So this was entitled A More Complete View of Creation, because I can do both in this, having cubes, tetrahedrons. Here's the chestahedron down here, tetrahedrons is all in there. So it's just becoming a more complete view. And in this same video, it's really cool video to check out. And because in there, I built a rhombic dodecahedron, and I actually found a document online that said how to grow a quasicrystal around this time. And in there, they talked about building it out of, and this is probably not how a real quasicrystal is built, but they built it out of different golden rhombus type of shapes. This is the obtuse golden rhombus shape. I have bigger ones here. This is the obtuse golden rhombus shape. It's basically like a squished flattened cube. This will become a theme that I followed up. And the acute one here, which was, like an elongated cube if you just pulled on the cube. And this build here of this little structure, which is, Velcroed together to create the rhombic shapes of those obtuse and acute ones. And in that video, I piece it together one by one, and I show you how every single piece looks very different, from each view of what they look like as they're integrating into this structure. So that took a lot of time and a good amount of work to figure out how the drawing works. But the beauty of it is that everything that I needed, all the information, was completely contained in the golden circle seed of life to create the rhombic tricontahedron, which is really kind of like the culminating form of all the platonic solids and just about everything. It's a fantastic form, and I'll discuss that more in the star child section of this. So yeah, so check that video out. I thought that was a really neat video that probably has gone overlooked by many people, as most of my videos have been. So yeah, if you like what you're seeing here, or you like this progression, please share this list with other people and try to get some of this work out there, because I do think it is quite unique and very expansive in our understanding of sacred geometry. So please share. The next thing that kind of I went on from there is I really got interested in that notion of the flattened obtuse and the acute, which are basically cubes that are either stretched out or smushed. That now started to put the cube itself, and this is a big thing I'll talk at the end of what my presentation of sacred geometry really does to the cube. If this black hexagon right here is tilted over to the side, that's how it would be in the rhombic tricontahedron, because a big thing that I think we're going to work with, if as we study this type of presentation that I'm doing, that really just presented itself to me through my exploration. I wasn't trying to make this stuff happen. The geometry just did it on its own, really. But what it basically told me, which was kind of getting your head around that cube, all of a sudden being one of 5 cubes, because there's 5 cubes in a dodecahedron, which means there's 5 cubes in this tricontahedron, the rhombic tricontahedron here. But you've got that cube, the black one, and it's only one of 5 that are in there. So all of a sudden our cube, which of course Metatron's cube, was always dead straight. The hexagon just fit perfectly, just like this one here, the blue. But now actually that's a phi-based rhombic tricontahedron, which now contains 5 cubes. And I'll show you pictures of this in just a moment. This video was entitled The Golden Seed and Tree of Life Create 5 Platonic Forms and a New Flower of Life Based on Phi Ratio. You see, I keep coming back to this new flower of life. I don't really know which one of these are going to be the flower of life, or if we even have to use the flower of life. I prefer the golden circle templates. But because the flower of life is such an important symbology out there, or a phrase that people are familiar with, this definitely gets it into that stream of consciousness that there's alternative ways to integrate this material into modified versions here with the phi ratio circles. So yeah, I built this all out of Zoom tools, and I think this is a really nice presentation that comes out of an obtuse version of this rhombus here, which contains a seed of life. And like I said in that video, we can't tell with these what the dimensionality is like this. It's really just a flat plane. So is it this big of a cube, or is it this smushed rhombus, or is it an acute one? They're all contained in there. It's up to us for our own interpretation. And we can do it all those ways if we choose to, just depending on what we want to find in the patterns, or what presents itself in the patterns as we search around. So, this theme continued on, and this was kind of a surprise for me, because after I worked with that, doing the build of the form with the models, I happened to just be looking around on a Wikipedia site, just making sure my drawings were accurate to what I could find on there. And then all of a sudden, I discovered that one of the drawings that I did actually turned out to be a fourth dimensional shape, this 600 cell, which is made up of 600, tetrahedral cells. So I called this video, the consciousness basically evolves, awakening consciousness evolves, sacred geometry. Let me say that again. Sacred geometry evolves in awakening consciousness. And at this point, I started to realize, when I started to look around, many of the other drawings I was doing, they were starting to incorporate higher dimensional singular views of those dimensions, either fourth or fifth dimension of these forms that were contained within the phi ratio patterns here. So that was really intriguing and exciting to me, that all of a sudden the fourth dimension came in to kind of show that this pattern was accessing this other plane. So in this one, I kind of talk out a little bit about this kind of evolution from the 2 tetrahedron to the 64 tetrahedron grid to the 600 cell version with this seed of life pattern. So another interesting evolution. I took just a quick break because it was so cool for me to see how much other richness, besides just working with the polyhedra, the forms themselves, was that the pattern here, it actually would bring me other places to, I was like, hey, maybe I can find a 9-pointed star in here. Or actually, I just extended those lines out and just checked an angle, and I was like, whoa, I got 140.034 for this angle down here when I connected these dots of extending these icosahedral edges out. This is a whole nother video, the 99.9% accurate 9-pointed star. Got another 9-pointed star one not connected to this pattern. That's worth checking out too. But all of a sudden, I discovered that we got 139.9, 140, and that was so accurate. And it just came, it's like part of the pattern with this golden seed life. I call it the icosahedral drawing method. It's just contained right in the pattern, which was just beautifully kind of synchronistic. Because in that video, I go through maybe at least 9 other methods that I found on the web, other videos that are out there, other people's drawing books, whatever I had, compared it. And this was, I think probably, I'd have to revisit the video, the most accurate version that was out there that I could discover on drawing a 9-pointed star accurately. There might have been some ties. Okay, well then, I did the 9-pointed star, and then it was like the icosahedron is really becoming, the central kind of unifying way to enter into this drawing. It was like you're working with the icosahedron. There's a lot of forms right here in this pattern that I'm showing you. This is, okay, let me just back up. Instead of the icosahedron, this is the golden seed of life circles. This is the flower of life Metatrons Cube. Now, what I did in this video, these Eve's icosahedron videos, and I'm not attached to any names. What I am attached to is that the geometry is represented accurately in the presentation of this material. That's pretty much it. Whatever we want to call them, you want to call it Metatrons icosahedrons, Metatrons tricontahedron, whatever. It's not that big of a deal. What is like how accurate and true, was there truth in this geometry that it actually contains those forms? And yes, this truthfully contains those forms, and I'm about to show you some star polyhedra. It contains those with these accurate phi-based dimensions, the dodecahedrons in here. And the icosahedron, like I said, is kind of the entry point into doing a lot of these drawings, because that flared angle that I just showed you on this 9-pointed star is really kind of like the foundation, because of that phi-based ratio circle in the middle, really is what breaks the equilateralness of it. And I took in the Eve's view because there was something that kind of had a more hidden quality to this, and maybe a more feminine orientation to the circles really dictating the lines, rather than the circles just kind of being in a pattern that just kind of went on, and you could just draw the lines. You didn't even have to do the circles after a while. You just focused on the lines within this and just connect the dots and get perfect equilateral triangles. But all of a sudden, this had this little break in the pattern here, which it does over here, but this is a phi ratio version, and that then created the pattern. And I called it the forbidden symmetry, just to kind of have a little play with the forbidden icosahedral symmetry, which was related to the icosahedron in crystallography, because that symmetry in crystallography, working with crystals, was called the forbidden symmetry, and it just all tied in nicely with the Eve theme. This is just a very short video where I just click through with some background music, showing you like how that form is just constructed out of the straight lines. But let's just talk quickly about what is in this pattern. Well, there's the dodecahedron right away. You can see that the lines, this is the line right here that the old Metatrons Cube, the Metatrons Cube, tried to connect right here to give you that Metatrons Cube, but it's not inaccurate, it's not in the right place. This is the spot which will give you the correct distance, which is between this little vesica shape, which I'll talk about later on. Right there is giving you the 1,2.618 along the back edge. And then I just drew in the rest of the stars. Now, this is the beauty of this. Each of those stars on the face of the dodecahedron pentagon faces, just like this, each of these stars is actually part of a cube. So that means that there are 5 cubes in there. And instead of us just being in a 1 cubic consciousness, which is basically what this is a 1 cubic consciousness, all of a sudden we've entered into the realm of a 5 cubic consciousness, because these cubes are not now the hexagon shape that would be around here. They're the tilted hexagons that I was mentioning before, and a few others. So here is the different ways these cubes show up, the 5 cubes. We have 2 with the hexagon orientation, which are part of this 5 cube star pattern dodecahedron, 1, 2. And then we've got 3 other versions here, which are, just a tilted cube, like flat faced along this way and just tilted, slanted this way a little bit. So I'm just showing 1, 2 faces. There's a face to the left, a face to the right, 1 back here and 1 over there. So that's our 6 faces. And those are just floating around here. When we put all those 5 cubes together, then we're back at the full dodecahedron. And that's really a kind of significant change, but it's all given in the lines. And I'll talk about this just a little bit at the end of the presentation here. So, well, we've got, of course, if we've got the dodecahedron, then all of a sudden we've got a cube. Well, then we've got tetrahedrons. So here's our tetrahedrons. Of course, 1 tetrahedron, you've got another one, that's the cube. There's a star tetrahedron. Now it's a tilted tetrahedron, but it's from the vertex view. So, it doesn't really matter. Just picture that it's just turned a little bit, or maybe spinning around from the vertex. Here's your octahedron. Of course, every tetrahedron has an octahedron in it. And of course, every cube has an octahedron in it as well that touches each of the 6 cube faces. So you got those vertices of the 6 vertices on the octahedron touching the cube. And now we got another cool view, and I didn't do the star tetrahedron. I just didn't get back to it. I just pulled up my old slides. But here is another kind of interesting view of the octahedron from this view, which would be in the cube that looks more like this one, or this one here in the middle. So just picture that those vertices, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, are now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's a sixth one right back there, and another tetrahedron. So, I mean, I really studied this stuff to make sure that all fit in there. The thing is, that's a little bit, there's a lot more lines in here. You really don't need them all. I was playing around with some different themes there, kind of replicating the whole line drawing at a smaller scale. But one thing about it is that some of these points, they float in space a little bit. They connect to the edges of circles, but it's not like you can just really easily go in there and draw them. You have to start with the larger outer forms, like the dodecahedron, and then draw on the lines to kind of work your way down to this. And I'd say that that's one advantage, that if you are just wanting to work with the tetrahedrons or the octahedron, probably just rotating it back to the regular flower of life type pattern is easier to show the 64 tetrahedron grid, for instance. Okay, well, that led to kind of led to really a kind of big expansion now, because all of a sudden, I was working really with the platonic solids, really figuring that out. But I started to be like, well, what happens if you just extend these lines out? And I started to see that they make crossings and make points further on. And all of a sudden, this was already a given in the Eve's icosahedron drawing. But all of a sudden, these other patterns, I said, well, hey, I've got this one and this one are showing up. This is basically the inside of a dodecahedron, the small stellated the great stellated icosahedron. No, it's great stellated dodecahedron. This is the great dodecahedron, the small stellated dodecahedron, and the great icosahedron. All of those were found in the golden circle template. Now, I just want to illustrate that a lot of my videos, I'm just really working with this hexagonal view, the hexagon view, because that's the seed of life, the flower of life, really the one that kind of really wasn't working out with the phi ratio forms. But this, I work with the other patterns of the four-fold symmetry and the five-fold symmetry. And this video, if you just scroll through it quick, here's all of those from all those different symmetries. So a lot of my videos, I'm not just showing you one perspective. I go through three perspectives, maybe more. Fourth perspective of coming on now, where they're stacked on top of one another. Dodecahedron stacked has come in. So I like to show and present all these perspectives from multiple views, but this one's really about this particular seed of life, flower of life pattern with the hexagon structure. So that was very expansive for me to all of a sudden realize that there was basically kind of an evolution in incorporating the Kepler-Poinsot star polyhedra, which until that point, they were like a mystery to me. I didn't really know anything about them. I mean, I've seen spiky forms around, but I didn't know anything about how to draw them. So they were really kind of like outside of my consciousness. And for me, at least, I relate to expanding my consciousness with the sacred geometry. Once I've done a drawing, because a lot of these things I discover in the drawing pad before I even see that someone else created it, then I go look, then I find it very enriching to find so much more information about these forms, connecting to the history of the people who discovered them. It's really fascinating that the drawings are part of that kind of expansion of consciousness to forms that you didn't even know exist. Is so much more stellated patterns out there than just the star tetrahedron, which is inside one cube. This is a stellation pattern that's part of 5 cubes, right? So I think that that's a real expansion to start to integrate this new terminology, these new forms, if you're not aware of them already, through the material and the videos that I presented. Check them out. And if you want to learn to draw them, I can do that and help you on that journey. You can maybe find other resources that will help you too. But this golden circle template really, really works really easily and very well. And I've been sharing it with many people with great success. So, one thing that this is part of that expansive expression was this video, this 9-pointed star here. It's not a perfect 140-degree angle 9-pointed star. This star is a key to understanding sacred geometry. Expand your consciousness with Coxeter's diagram. I really think that Coxeter, the mathematician, was way ahead. He was setting the stage for an expansion in our understanding of sacred geometry. Our sacred geometry really didn't even catch up to it. It hasn't catched up to it until what I think is what I'm presenting with a lot of this work here. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a few more slides. But he's showing different forms in his books that just weren't really showing up in any sacred geometry textbook that I really come across, or that gave me any ways to draw them. And he's also got another book, this 59 icosahedron. And this is what this star is about. It's about the 59 icosahedron stellations. And this diagram is basically like a cutting template that gives you all the information you need to create those 59 icosahedron. I only really worked with just a few of them. I didn't try to draw them all. I might be able to, but it didn't seem like that was an interest. One that really got me excited was the echidnahedron, which I love showing this one off. You know, I built it, drew it, and I just made it from scratch from my own template and drawing the form and everything with that template. And then, you know, working on discovering, there's a few different ways I discovered how to draw it, but I did it in this way to really show how expansive that flower of life pattern, when it expands out, can get more and more flower of creation at this point, because it's not just the regular 19 circles, but it keeps going and going and going. And that was essentially to help me go and create this final compound of the icosahedron and dodecahedron, in that sequence at least, which was kind of a new compound to me, but I built it out of Zoom tools, and then I figured out how to draw it. This is another great video because it's really the first one that I found software where I was able to rotate the 3D forms around. So in this video, I walk you through the build from a flat 2D plane and take it all the way out and show you how each form is built off of one another and how it expands out. And I rotate it around and then show you in the drawings. So yeah, check out that one. If you're inspired by that. You might want to watch these in sequence. You'd see a nice progression. It weeds out a lot of the other videos that are mixed in there. You know, there's 17 videos or 18 videos, including this one. And there's probably be a few more that are added. But yeah, just if any of these inspire you, just check that one out and maybe jump around in there, because they're all linked and you'll see that the same theme of these golden circles keeps showing up. So here was another little side discovery that just kind of like pure magic to me when I'm, you know, just working with the drawing pad, extending lines out. But when all of a sudden you find out that when you do the golden circles in the phi ratio circles here, all of a sudden all the points along the edge of the circle will give you a perfect 30 division 30 segments. So I could extend these all the way out, and that would divide that circle into 30. And on this one, if I duplicated the pattern, basically have 12 circles or 28 circles around this, then I could get 60 all the way around here, dividing it to 60. Each line on here is corresponding and meeting a perfect overlapping position of where the circles intersect one another. It was just phenomenal to me. This video has got very little views. I guess you have to be more into the drawing of sacred geometry to really discover how magical that is. But maybe this will inspire you to start drawing and making some very interesting, cool patterns. But the cool part of this, which I thought, was that the 60 and the 60 base mathematics or base 60 mathematics, or even how do we divide a clock into 60 seconds? You know, how did the discovery of creating an easy division, if you wanted to make a 60 division segment to keep track of time, how would you do that? Well, the phi ratio circle diagram does that easily. And I mean, really easily. Okay, so now this is the latest material. This is only from like a couple weeks ago, but this is really where I think this is all kind of headed for me. I had to build a big foundation. Now that's, you know, about 7-8 months of work on this, you know, really working full on trying to figure out which circles go with what and which lines connect to what and what form is going to come out. I mean, it was quite a lot of discovery process that was kind of nonstop. And I'm going to got more that I haven't shared. They keep going, but I felt like I had to crystallize all this for you. But this is kind of the next phase that gets into Dan Winter's star mother model. because this then took all the sacred geometry that I've been working and brought it into an implosive model. See, let me back up. When I started to try and, with this model here, try to build everything off of, well, the flower of life pattern must be just build out infinitely and go out. And, we just keep doing these circles over and over again. But what I discovered is that it doesn't implode or expand. It stays at a certain plane at that point. And, I was in resistance because every so often in my drawings, I would have to add bigger circles and I'd be like, oh man, how do I just keep the smaller circles? Because when you added those bigger circles, all of a sudden I was like, geez, those drawings are going to get too complex for people to remember how to do it. So anyway, the star mother model just on itself, without the implosion stuff, can just be drawn, all the forms within this, golden circle template, just like I've been showing you. It's right there. All the 5 circles are there. This star mother model, includes the octatetra, star tetra, the cube, the dodeca, small stellated dodeca, icosa, the great stellated, he calls it the stellated version of the icosahedron because that's down in there. And that all goes back to the dodeca. But this then creates an infinite level of implosion and explosion. And this pattern back here wasn't imploding. It was fixed. It was real stable, very, very stable, infinite little circles on and on and on. It allowed me to draw the forms very well, but it didn't introduce infinite non-destructive compression that Dan talks about. So I had to come up with a new pattern. This one was just pure magic, how this one evolved, of the infinite compression of phi ratio circles. And I did this, of course, from all the different views. So we have the hexagon view, the pentagon view, the square view, as I call them. These will compress infinitely in phi ratio, this circle diagram of all phi ratio circles going on all the way down here into an infinite point of phi compression, non-destructively, wave mechanics compression, all right there in that diagram. Now all I had to do was just put the forms in it, right? So because I already knew how the forms worked within the circle patterns, well, then I could do the icosa. I don't have the stellations in here, but I'm showing you icosa dodeca, icosa dodeca, icosa dodeca, and that is star mother model. From this angle that we're looking at it, one little Russian doll nesting pattern infinitely within one another. Okay, so, I was like, great, this is what a expansion from where I was, infinite expansion and infinite implosion than where I started with discovering that the icosahedron's not drawn correctly. So the sacred geometry really took me on a journey, but this last video that I did, the star child, because Dan had a star mother, and this pattern, this star child, I call it, was born out of the star mother with the infinite love. And I put this video out intentionally. I had it all like prepared and ready to do it before this date, or I was thinking, when should I do this? I said 2/22/22 is the day to do it. So on that day, I did this presentation of the star child, which now includes some of the forms that Coxeter discovered in 1973 in his book Regular Polytopes. These were forms that really weren't much around in existence, because these had these hidden vertices, they're called, within the form back in here. These lines go inside. So basically what this form is, it now, instead of just focusing on icosa dodeca, it now focuses on the rhombic tricontahedron and the rhombic tricontahedron stellations. So the rhombic tricontahedron has a lot of stellations, 120 something of them, a lot more than the icosahedron. So, but anyway, this really all you need for this implosion pattern, which this is all of it, and it has to use the implosion pattern a little bit to even draw it, is we've got the icosa, the rhombic tricontahedron, which essentially would be this form, the star child form. It doesn't have a name because I had to do some compound here of 2 forms that traditionally aren't compound, but it's specifically in the geometry when you build it. It's just apparent that this is a form that's in there. But this is the first stellation, and then this is the small stellation of the tricontahedron. And here the orange-ish yellow one is the great stellated version, which is a dodecahedron internal hull, and this is an icosahedron hull here. Those two combined, of course, to create the rhombic tricontahedron. But these little stellations, these small little stellations, continually go on to produce rhombic tricontahedron after tricontahedron after tricontahedron. And this is what that looks like from this perspective of the hexagon view within the infinite golden circle compression of that golden circle seed of life pattern that I started out with. I just don't have to include the big circles that continually swoop into the center, which would be the original seed of life. All I really needed was the inner circle, and I continue to braid that out. You can even see it's creating a little braiding structure as we go through that infinite compression braiding that's going on. And the forms are just 1 tricontahedron, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 into infinity tricontahedrons. And in that video, in my iPad, I zoom into the zoom right down into the form so you can kind of go through it into this diagram. So it's not a 2D static diagram. You can kind of almost feel a little bit like, you're imploding into this infinitely, non-destructively for that matter too, because of the wave mechanics that Dan is going to describe, has described, and will describe more in relationship to these forms soon. So here's another, just wanted to kind of show that these patterns, the Coccidor versions that are in his book 1973, are kind of another expansion that needed to incorporate the two circles of the phi ratio. So they're even a little bit more complex than the regular stellations, the Poinsot, Kepler-Poinsot stellations. These stellations needed to start to incorporate, and it's funny because I did this one about 2-3 months before, and I was like, oh man, this is cool, but gosh, it really broke the pattern here because I have to add these extra circles in to do this. And I was like, oh, geez, I don't know. But already, the geometry was saying, you have to go this way because, you're going to put these together essentially. This form, which is the great rhombic tricontahedron stellation. This is the small stellation of the tricontahedron. These two had to be, were combined to come together to create this compound version, which is then the internal hull of this pattern here. So those two combine, and that's now a rhombic tricontahedron that is indented a little bit. I built all the forms and the models. That's the star child, star mother video. Check that one out. That's really like a huge culminating type of work of this progression that you see to come to this point, basically coming up with a completely new pattern of an infinite compression phi ratio pattern here. And I haven't seen it anywhere else, and probably exists out there. Someone is probably doing it, who knows, but at least in this kind of cohesive version of all these forms, this is all I've discovered. Basically what I'm showing you here is what I found on it, or what I could find on it. And most of it was just through wearing a lot of elbow sleeves down from working on the ground trying to discover all this. So definitely wore through this shirt. Okay, so this is a dodecahedron here that is, infinitely compressing inside. This is a little bit more of a artistic version. It's just showing some of these triangular shapes that are part of the stars that would be on a dodecahedron head face. They're just infinitely compressing. This was a very cool one because then I discovered you can even do it with the Icosahedral dodecahedron here, and this will infinitely implode. And that's a really cool pattern to watch these triangular shapes get smaller and smaller and smaller. So, from an artistic perspective, or just patterns that are really, geometrically interesting, there's a lot of ripe activity with these infinite compression phi ratio patterns here. Okay, so this is probably going to still be another future video. I mentioned in the Star Mother, but this is an important part of this because it does get back to the rhombic tricontohedron. Remember, this is 30-sided faces. This little thing here, the ball of wax was created, the rhombic tricontohedron. It basically fits right inside a cube. And I could show that because here's that cube that was in the dodecahedron, right? That one, the long one that goes through. So here's the black dodecahedron, the blue edge cube. And down inside there is a rhombic tricontohedron. You might want to pause this section of the video to see what I'm talking about, because it wasn't very cool for me to find this, figure this out. You know, we got a face of the rhombic tricontohedron and another face right there. We'd have a face here and a face there. So basically 6 faces of this rhombic tricontohedron are touching 6 faces of the cube. It just fits right in there nicely, right? Well, that makes sense because the icosahedron fits in there. But the neat thing is that this is just one cube. Really, there's 30 faces here, right? So what about the other 24 faces? Well, there's 4 more cubes, basically, is what I'm saying. This is why the one cube consciousness is not the whole story. If our evolution is to start to, evolve into understanding more and more complex forms and how they relate to us in the universe, well, the one cube is only one piece of the elephant, basically. There's a whole other elephant here that's got 4 other limbs that we're kind of not focusing on. And these drawings really kind of present that. Pretty much what I've been thinking, coming to me recently is, just like how everybody pretty much knows a cube. If they've never done sacred geometry, they know what a cube is, right? A 6-sided die, you have a board game, cubes are everywhere, right? Stacking blocks, little cubes. My speculation is that my hope is that in time, the rhombic tricontohedron will become the new cube, basically, in our expansion of consciousness. Eventually, every child, everyone will know, oh yeah, that's just the rhombic tricontohedron. Yeah, there's 5 cubes. Everybody knows there's 5 cubes, right? That's really kind of what this sacred geometry is. And that's what the importance of this imagery that I'm showing you is all about, is part of that evolution in understanding of broadening our horizons to a greater vista of 5 cube consciousness, or triconta consciousness, basically. Okay, so I got a few more slides. This is a long one. I'm presenting more on each of these, but check out the videos because there's a lot more I'm not even showing you. This is one slide from a whole video. So here's one. This is another theme here. These are kind of wrapping up. These have really not been in many other presentations, but it's kind of going to give you a good overview of this, what I was just talking about in terms of, here's an octahedron, this blue. Cool thing about the octahedron, if you extend the edges out, they'll create an icosahedron. So this is an octahedron with the normal hexagon view. I was really surprised that when I was able to just extend those lines out with the octahedron, the 8-sided form, right? 8-sided, it's one of the platonic solids. You extend those lines of the octahedron out. This is the one that's in the cube. It will actually hit the golden ratio circles. I mean, I could draw this version of it in the golden ratio circles, an icosahedron that is accurate right here with golden ratio lengths, 1 to 0.618 right there. But the only thing about that is that when I start to expand this version of this drawing out, right, to do all the other things that I'm showing you, like with the star polyhedra, the infinite expansion and implosion, this pattern doesn't work with it anymore because it's tilted. The icosahedron and the tricontohedron, dodecahedron, basically what this has done is it's put the cube, one single cube, back in the driver's seat, right? It said, your cube is going to be one cube in the center. And that's basically what Metatrons Cube is, one cube in the center. All of a sudden, but the pattern doesn't go anywhere. It locks it into one plane. We want infinite expansion and infinite compression, non-destructively. then all of a sudden we've got to rotate that cube, at least from what I'm finding, to be one of 5 cubes. The icosahedron or the tricontohedron, this hexagon shape, will be tilt the octahedron and all those shapes, but then all of a sudden that aligns to the golden circle pattern. And now that's what becomes the tunnel, is through the tricontohedron, rhombic tricontohedron, which is this shape here. With this, which I believe is the vertice up from the pentagonal structure, more so from the hexagon view that I'm showing you, but they can both do this infinite type of implosion thing, at least the diagrams can. Okay, so that's one thing that these drawings do, and one awesome little discovery that I hadn't shared in another video, but was really neat basically for me to discover the simplicity of what this was, because essentially way back when I started doing this, I wanted to figure out how to incorporate the phi ratio into the seed of life or flower of life, right? Basically what this whole video is about. So it basically meant if I have my pentagon star here, I had to, have it oriented so that that would tilt and be flat in this plane rather than straight at you like it is in the pentagon view. So when that tilts, as you can see here, and I'll show you this when we're done with the presentation, there's the dodecahedron as lined up. And it was so magical for me to discover, which is, became rather obvious after a while, is that the outer edges of this big pentagon here just became part of the icosahedron that it would be connected to. So the dotted blue lines here, pause the video, take a quick look if you need. There's the triangle. This blue line is just part of the edges of the icosahedron. And that was really satisfying in my journey to realize that I have just tilted, and this is really all it came down to, was just how to figure out how to tilt the pentagon so it would maintain its pentagonal symmetry, right? Phi ratio essentially, in a view that wasn't 5-fold symmetry. It incorporated into 6-fold symmetry. And that's essentially what the phi ratio circles did, was just do that simple tilt. And in there, this red here within the star points, that then becomes, this is the dodecahedron right on the back side of this, that then becomes the one dodecahedron face, right? So that's all it was. It was just tilting it just to get that symmetry to maintain. And then I just decided, about a couple months, I didn't realize this for a few months, but all I had to do was take an angle measurement. And when you do these 5 circles in this hexagonal perspective here, all of a sudden, this little diamond rhombus shape here has a 144-degree angle. So each of these are having 144, there's little overlap, little diamond shapes in the middle. And this little structure will create the perfect decagons right around it. So I can go to 5-fold symmetry from 6-fold symmetry, just like that, or 3-fold symmetry. And there's the 36-degree angle. So of course, this is a 36, this is 72 degrees. Well, that's a golden triangle, right? So we got a golden triangle, which is half of one of the kite faces. It was just built into the system, into the geometry, right? So it's just, it's right there. It's so blatantly obvious that this is the phi ratio circles. If you want to, basically do everything I just showed you with sacred geometry and really upgrade it to a whole nother level of integration with phi, then this is one way, and I've got a few other little tricks up my sleeve of how I could do this in other ways. But this is one really simple way to do so much more interesting things with sacred geometry than drawing, 60-something circles for the flower of life, which is a beautiful pattern, because here it is. It really is the doorway, was a doorway for me, as it is for many people, to even begin with the notion to discover these patterns with the phi ratio circle. So this is pretty much this pattern with the little phi circles, and that's the one I said, which was really not doing the compression This one here is the seed of life, because really this is mostly what you need to construct almost everything I showed you in this, except more of those complex ones that had the, actually you can do the echidnahedron, this big one here. You can draw that in this seed of life over here. So the seed of life really became the benchmark of it, that Eve's icosahedron drawing, or Metatron's icosahedron, whatever you like. That became the foundation of this geometry. And then something new was born out of that pattern that related to Dan Winter's work, which was slowly creeping into my consciousness about how this will infinitely compress into the center point of this mandala with golden ratio proportion throughout each of these non-destructively wave compression going through here. So that is the kind of the big summary. Those are the main videos that I put in the playlist. I'm just going to say a few more things, because this is definitely not intended to be a promotional video. I just loving to share this information of the sacred geometry. Many of the videos, you can probably figure out how to draw this. If you have any experience with sacred geometry, you probably can do, I share so much just out there openly. And just as much as I do even in these classes. But a few things I wanted you to be aware of is, first of all, there's a video that I did, The Flower of Life Blossoming in This New Era, which has a lot about the things I shared with you and some of the expansion. But the nice thing about it is that you can learn a little bit more about me, if you're interested in that, and some of my journey and how I came to be and got involved with this and why I'm interested. And some of that is kind of woven in that. It's a really nice talk. It's down in the new conversations section. In fact, I guess I will plug it into this playlist that I put up here. So we'll have maybe 20 videos in there. I wanted to let you know that I've got an apprenticeship that I'm just going to continue to run for forever, pretty much, as long as I can. I'm just going to keep doing it every few months. So I'm doing 2-month apprenticeship, which is 8 weeks, which is meeting on a Mondays. I got such a great reception of that this next time, because I've already run one session. I only take 6 people in that might increase, but because I had so many people, I just decided to do a whole nother group. And I still have a few spots in that group. So if you're all inspired by this, because this is basically the geometry, my methods, sacred geometry, the way that I teach, is like this, and many more discoveries, many more than what I've got in there, and new things probably that I'm unaware of will come through just working with the apprentices based on your interests as well. So check that out. There it is, newgeometry.space apprenticeship. And another thing I've got going on is Patreon, which is a kind of slower paced version of the apprenticeship. We meet once a month now on Fridays. And there's a curriculum, I guess, materials, because I'm working on resources that slowly work people through written material. I do a video each month that's just personally, just me sharing the drawing that is in the written material. And, those different things unlock at these different tier levels, phi ratio tier levels that we going on here, and different support for different levels that exist here, which I think are very, pretty reasonably priced based on the information that is contained within there. And, those are just some ways that you can engage with me in sacred geometry. There's a lot of other great sacred geometries out there. So continue to explore and study with anybody you can with sacred geometry, any video. Everything's got some little nugget and kernel of wisdom and knowledge within it. And this is just what's really emerged for me. And I really think I've discovered, a kind of nice foundation to build off of that continues to be very fruitful in the discoveries. And I'm continuing to look forward to sharing much more with you on how that all unfolds. But I hope you appreciated and enjoyed this kind of summary overview of the amount of 63 videos that I did in just about a little over a year. I hope you found this kind of a way to kind of navigate that and kind of clump those all together and kind of watch a nice progression around one particular theme. And my hope is that the Golden Circle template and the forms that are contained within that will continue to infinitely expand in our consciousness, just like it essentially shows in the diagrams themselves. So much love and appreciation, and thanks for watching, and peace.